Well, hello. I'm here with Caitlin to talk about Space Force. But first, I want to talk about wireless protocols. I have a bunch of articles trying to understand this stuff. Apple added something called a Thread radio to the new iPhone. And I didn't know about this, but Thread is a 2.4 gigahertz IPv6 based protocol, a competitor with Zigbee. You can do mesh networking with it. And apparently, smart home devices are expected to use Matter over Thread, a protocol over the wireless transmission. So that's why Apple has added it so your phone can integrate with your home mesh wireless network. Although there's something about how you have to have a gateway router, and your phone could act as a gateway router, but that would be pretty silly because your phone isn't there, your devices wouldn't be able to communicate or something. So anyway, I find home technology very baffling. But anyway, that's the start of it. And then the next article is the newest one that really caught my attention. Huawei and a bunch of Chinese companies have made another wireless protocol, which is apparently only available on these devices, which are largely embargoed from America, I think. And this really sounds amazing. It's called Nearlink, and it claims to be low power, much faster than Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, much less power consumption, and incredible latency, 1/30th of a millisecond, which is awful hard to believe. So it sounds really great, although I don't know if you're going to see much of it in America. But I guess it's the Chinese competitor. So I guess our future devices are going to need to have lots more radios and lots more different kinds of Wi-Fi. Do you know anything?
I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this. Yes.
It seems awfully confusing to me. Why do we need all these different wireless protocols?
Well, I know I'm familiar with Matter, and Matter came about because everyone tried to connect their smart devices over Wi-Fi and just had their own protocols for lights and TVs and all sorts of smart appliances. And it became a mess. Like you would have to install the Philips app to control one set of lights, and you would need another app to control, your color changing lights from another company, and there were no real standards. So we move along to the modern era where people are like, okay, we need to like standardize like home automation. And so that's where Matter comes in. So you get a Matter compliant device, and it will connect to other Matter devices. So even if it doesn't get a good like Wi-Fi signal, if there is another Matter device around, it can sort of bounce off that one, and then eventually get to a station that or a gateway to the internet if it needs internet connectivity. And that's where Matter comes from, and that's why we need Matter, because otherwise, just home automation is an absolute mess.
Well,
Now,
I've noticed that a lot of homes, the Wi-Fi signal doesn't really reach every room. So it seems
right.
like it would help address that problem. Is it able to connect more devices with less collisions or something?
I don't know if it's less collisions. In fact, I don't even know the maximum number of devices a single Matter network can hold off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Although I imagine it's quite a lot. But yeah, that's why Matter exists. It is not just like, oh, we should have a new protocol. It's like, no, the current standards are just not working, and consumers are frustrated. They just want to pick up a light bulb, throw it in their smart house, and have it work.
Now, they also don't want a separate app for everything, but that seems to me like a
Right.
totally separate problem. I mean, it's not that they're using different protocols and need a different app for different protocol. It's just the manufacturers choose to make an app specialty to their device.
Well, there was no standard before Thread and before Matter.
Okay.
And so the developers would just have to come up with their own protocol.
Okay.
Right. And so
Right. So you each even
yeah.
invent your own proprietary protocol, and then you need your own app.
Yeah, and of course, if the company goes under or if they stop supporting the product, then your smart home is no longer smart. And this is where Matter comes in. It just solves all these problems.
Okay. Well, good. I appreciate the information. And I guess the Chinese thing is just their competitor to Matter, Nearlink.
I don't know, because Matter isn't supposed to be transferring data quickly. So
Yeah.
I don't know what Nearlink is. Nearlink might be something similar to like Bluetooth PAN.
Well, they say it's 60% less power, 6 times the data transmission speed, and 10 times the device connections, I think, compared to Bluetooth.
Yeah, so it might be a Bluetooth, but Bluetooth isn't fast to begin with. I mean, it's
No, that's true. Anyway, that's important networking information to be aware of as we go forward. And so you've got people hiring tech workers now. They just threw them away. Now they want them back.
we knew this was going to happen. We knew this was going to happen. We said, they're going to fire them and they're going to need them back. And it's already happening. Not even like a year later. They're like, oh, sorry, we fired you. Can we hire you back? Because all the other companies were firing people. We fired you, but we really shouldn't have fired you.
And they gave them severance pay. So
Yes.
they probably didn't even save any money by doing this.
Exactly. And so we're seeing the rehiring, especially with the AI boom. Like I said this from the beginning, it was so stupid to lay off all those people. And so I'll pull up the article. And so Meta and Salesforce are, this is from Insider by Tim Pandis. So Meta and Salesforce want to rehire workers they just laid off. And, unfortunately, I mean, as the article points out, it's kind of awkward, but we knew this was going to happen, right? They fired them back earlier this year. And now they want to rehire them because of the AI boom. I mean,
so you wonder what business incentive drove them to do this. I've heard, like Scott Galloway try to explain, this has something to do with the stock price and making your quarter look better, but it seems to be at a high cost in loyalty.
It is. They were looking at the numbers, right? And they were looking at what other companies were doing, and they wanted to maximize, their shareholder returns on the short term, but on the long term, it's not going to help their stock. It's not going to help them grow. They just spent more money to make things on paper look better back in January.
And everybody at these companies must be looking for another job. And I'm sure they're going to keep looking for another job. They've all been informed that you're trash and will throw you away on a moment's notice. So don't stay here.
Exactly. It was a huge mistake. It was people not thinking like humans. It was people thinking like economists, which, you can't necessarily fault the CEO or CFO, I should say, for thinking in terms of economics. But when you talk about humans, it's difficult to compute or translate the human cost into a dollar amount.
I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, you figure out how much it costs to replace them. You figure out how often they're going to leave. You figure out their attrition rate. There's a bunch of ways to measure how much it costs you to have people and how much a decision about your people is going to cost you. It does boil down to money pretty easily.
Well, I mean, it can, but I mean, how do you quantify in dollars the loss of, loyalty among even the people that stay?
Well, that's easy. You count how many of them leave. Measuring the turnover rate is a very common economic measure of your company. How often do people leave?
Yeah, I guess. Anyway, but yes, no, we're already seeing people being hired back. So
yeah.
Sorry you got fired. Congratulations on the severance. Now you're gonna get paid more money to come back.
Yeah, this is why I always tell my students they want to make career plans, and I say around here planning isn't much use. You just need to be agile and jump on the opportunities. Nobody's loyal. Nobody stays in one place more than a couple of years. You're just jumping from like one ice flow to another as they melt under you.
Yep.
That's the Silicon Valley way. Well, anyway, now I got some physics. I was pretty interested in light-based computing. Seems like it's really coming. You can't buy it yet, but these scientists at the University of Chicago have made a waveguide, and they made the waveguide only a couple of atoms thick, thinner than the wavelength of light. And they found that contrary to what you might think, this is extremely efficient. The light cheerfully follows the waveguide, even though the photons are extending out of the material. And it's a very effective, a two-dimensional optical waveguide is a very good way to steer light to go where you want it to go. And it's one of the components you need for purely optical computing. And MIT has plans here. I'm not sure if, I think they did some of this experimentally. They've made a light-based computer that performs machine learning activities, and it therefore has a 100-fold improvement in energy efficiency and a 25-fold improvement in compute density. So this I've been waiting for decades, or 1 or 2 decades. If you stopped using electrons flowing through semiconductors and you switched to using light for computing, it would have a ton of advantages. One of the advantages that most interests me is that the light could be quantum mechanically entangled without having to cool everything to cryogenic temperatures. So it'll make quantum computing far more effective, and it'll probably make all the computing far more effective, less power, less heat, faster. So the processors of the future, and are currently not very far in the future, will be throwing light around, like through fiber optics, instead of throwing electrical signals around.
So I have some questions about light.
Yeah.
So I understand that the reason why, like, I understand the concept of a boson, right? Like, you can't, an electron has an electric field around it. Now it cannot, in classical physics, the fields would sort of bounce off each other, but they can't do that. And it needs a discrete packet. And so a photon will go between the electric field of one electron to the electric field of another and discretely transfer the energy that way. And Feynman diagrams, all that stuff.
That's
great. And so when you talk about light, though, and light being photons the entire time, is that really true? Because if you look at Maxwell's equations, Maxwell doesn't think in terms of like a photon.
No, it came before that.
Right, it was before that. But I mean, it seems like, and if you look at like two magnets, you know, when they repulse each other, photons aren't being spewed out of the magnets. You know, a virtual photon, you know, sort of exists for a second, you know, and so, but why would light be like photons all the time when other electromagnetic phenomenon just create virtual photons at the point of like interaction?
Well, I think the answer is that light never was a particle or a wave. Both particles and waves are approximate things that only exist at a large scale. The actual stuff that the universe is made out of has both particle and wave properties. And so the photons are always the same, and every electromagnetic interaction is mediated by photons. That's how it works. And so there's no contradiction.
Right. Well, I mean, they're mediated by photons.
Yeah.
But every equation of light just treats it like when it's in transit, treats it like a wave, and you don't have to think about the photons at all. So why do we always depict light as photons traveling through space when it could just be an excitation of like the electromagnetic field?
No, you do have to think of it as photons. Maxwell's equations are just like PV equals nRT for gases. They represent a thermodynamic average of a large group of photons moving together, where you can describe them with an aggregate property. But it's just consisting of little photons, just like a gas is consisting of a bunch of atoms. And the photons travel as waves but arrive as particles, and that is the way everything really works. And our idea that anything else should happen is just an illusion.
Okay, so it is important to think about light as photons traveling, not just photons at the start and the beginning and just waves in between.
Yes, yeah, both photons have this property, just like all particles, of only having a definite position when they're measured and traveling, dispersing into waves until they're measured again. Then there's a collapse of the wave function. And Maxwell's equations are just an approximation in a macroscopic situation where you have a lot of photons.
Okay. So so the photon really, so when you talk about like the photon going through a waveguide, the photon really does travel in and out. It's not just like a wave that represents in the electromagnetic spectrum. You know, it actually is a photon that is traveling through the waveguide the whole time.
Well, when you say a photon travels through a waveguide, or for that matter, through a fiber optic cable, it is not like saying a can of beans goes down a conveyor belt, in the sense that it has a definite position all the time. You put it in one end, it then smears out into a wave, a probability wave through it, and then it appears at the other end. We describe that as going through, but it's not true that it had a definite position in between.
It has a wave-like position, though.
It has a probability density distribution. It could be at a variety of locations until you measure it again, then it collapses into one of them.
Right, but from the point of light, though, it does not experience time, so it would see the end of the waveguide as being zero distance away from the emission source,
No,
right?
no, it's a space-like distance away. It does it. The photons have to move, it moves at the speed of light. So it gets to the other end period after it was fed in.
So it doesn't have to, so there's no length contraction for light as it moves?
No, there can't be. Flight always moves at the speed of light and never changes.
Right, but there's no like length contraction. So if
no, you can't define it because you can't stop the light. So the light is always moving at the speed of light. Now, other particles, you can slow them down and then speed them up and compare those two states, but not light.
Okay, so light, so time, so quote unquote, time dilation, length contraction does not apply to light.
No, it couldn't. It would be infinite.
Right.
So you can never slow it down. It's always moving at the speed of light. That's why it is the special material that defines the nature of space and time.
But fermions can go slower than light, but can get sped up close to the speed of light, and then their distances. So
that's it. Everything else always has to be slower than light. Light always has to move at the speed of light, and nothing goes faster.
Right, but light is not subject to the laws of special relativity itself.
Well, it has to have zero mass for this to work.
Right.
It's so no massive particle can ever move at the speed of light. And
right.
Light has no rest mass.
Right, but well, I mean, I'm talking about length. I'm talking about Lorentz transformations.
Yeah, but the mass change is the one to think of. Yeah, fair enough. Also, length and time. You're right. And light is the boundary between space and time. Essentially, it is not something moving with a reasonable velocity and changing and extorting as it approaches the boundary. It is the boundary. So that's about as well as I understand it. It is sort of mind bending. I understand.
Yeah. I'm very much in the weeds of trying to understand quantum mechanics and how they fit in with Maxwell's equations at the moment.
Well, yes, that's very good stuff to think about.
And it is, yeah, it is. And I'm trying to just wrap it, because the math is oftentimes very contradictory.
Oh, yes.
In terms of what it's trying to tell you.
And I would point out, we really do not understand it. The collapse of the wave function is an area of active research, and that's the hard part. How do you define a measurement? Why is it that it's one way before it's measured, another way after it's measured? Is that magic or what? And people are just recently, I've been reading experiments where they try to understand what the collapse of the wave function is. And this is an area of ongoing research.
And what I was just thinking about, and no one has ever talked to me about this, and maybe I'm just crazy, but if you release, and like let's take a neon atom, right? You excite an electron, it goes into a higher state, collapses into a lower state, photon gets emitted, light goes out in all directions, and then it hits a wall, and then it's going to transfer the wave function is going to collapse. When it hits a wall on one side of the room, immediately collapse on the other side of the room, so you don't get like two photons, right? Yeah, which would mean that there's essentially faster than light communication, but it doesn't matter because there's no information being transferred.
Yes, that's entanglement. That's the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen experiment. And there was a paper that came out last week that suggested that is done with information traveling through wormholes, saying the Einstein-Rosen bridge is equal to the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen effect, which is kind of nuts, but it's a serious proposal. But that is one way to look at it, is to say that there was an instantaneous transfer of a signal of some sort going faster than light there. That's why,
and that's why I was thinking about, in terms of relativistic, viewpoints, is that if the photon itself is going at relativistic speeds, all distances are zero. Therefore, if it did collapse its own wave function across a room instantaneously, to the photon, that distance is always zero. So from the photon's point of view. But if you're saying that the photon does not experience relativistic effects,
well, I think you can't define it. Basically, the photon has zero mass, which is then divided by zero. You're going so fast. So basically, the equations we're used to only apply to things going slower than light.
Okay.
This is like the singularities you get with black holes and stuff. You get these weird conditions where your math stops working.
Well, the math clearly states that if you could put an infinite velocity into, or infinite energy into a massive object,
right,
time would essentially stop, and all distances would equal 0 to all things in the universe.
You get a collapse of space and time, and
Right, and right now, photons don't have mass,
right,
so they're capable of going that speed.
right.
And so it seems logical that they would view all distances as 0 and there would be no time.
Well, they define the difference between space-like and time-like distance, and they can't go any slower.
Right.
So they really are a special case.
Okay.
Anyway, it's and all these things supposedly came from the cooling of the Big Bang. It cooled down into the electromagnetic fields we have as one of the 4 fundamental forces. And perhaps it could have cooled into different fundamental forces. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I highly recommend people get into RF and light propagation, because this stuff gets really fun after a while, but it takes years of playing around with this stuff to get to the point where you really get this kind of pleasure of thinking about what the hell is really going on here when you turn on a light bulb.
Yes, and you're right that it is complicated and not completely understood, and very much worth thinking about.
Yeah, and a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah, as long as you don't get frustrated. Yeah. All right. And so anyway, Amazon wants to charge us for Alexa, eh?
Well, maybe. So Dave, Dave Limp, I should say, who is leaving Amazon devices, going over to Blue Origin, is talking about AI being really expensive. So this is the article in Insider by Tom Carter. And so what Dave Limp says is that, running Alexa, using all this AI, training the AI models, is ridiculously expensive and requires these giant server farms. And it'll likely cost so much money to do in the future going forward as we scale up, that a lot of smart devices will start probably charging. And that's going to create a weird economic model for a lot of these services, because no one can deny that AI is useful. But do you want to pay for like 10 different AI services for your different devices? Or would one company come in like OpenAI and just say, okay, we do all the processing for your AI, and you just pay like for your OpenAI subscription, and then all your devices will use that? I mean, that's the only viable solution I can think of for this, because you can't just subscribe to like 100 different AI services for every single program that's going to use AI.
Yeah.
But it's
I don't believe any of this.
You don't believe that AI is expensive?
No, I don't think it's going to stay expensive. I'm seeing a lot of articles saying they were able to cut the cost by 10 or 20 or 50 times by just doing it more efficiently. So I think that's what's going to happen. The AI will improve its efficiency, and then they'll give it away for free, just like Google searches.
Oh, I know what we can do. We can have the AI figure out algorithms to do AI more efficiently.
Yeah.
And then those algorithms, new programs, can figure out new algorithms to do AI even more efficiently and better than before. And we can do this an infinite amount of times.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what Kurzweil said 40, 50 years ago. He said when AI starts improving itself, then you'll move faster than Moore's law, much faster, into a brave new world that we can't predict, where gadgets are improving much faster and great things will happen. And I think that's all happening. And
we're starting to see models that can produce stuff, but they don't understand what they're producing. They can only make predictions, based on previous sets of data, finding local minimums, that kind of stuff, but they're not actually knowing what they're doing. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Until machine learning gets a full-on ability to explore the world, has a functional nervous system, all of our AI is just going to constantly hallucinate.
Well, I was just reading an article today where they have some attempts to fix the hallucinations, but also, I think a problem like how to come up with a better algorithm to make AI faster to compute is something you probably could do with AI.
Well, probably. But like I said, it wouldn't understand what it's doing. It would just be looking at patterns.
It could run the code and measure the time and then change it until it gets faster. That's exactly the kind of thing it can do.
Yeah, but it wouldn't understand what it's trying to do, though. That's the thing.
It wouldn't have any meaning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's up to humans to apply meaning, but you certainly could pose the problem, make this code faster, design this chip so the code runs faster, and just give it the parameters, and it could do that.
Right. But if you want that infinite singularity growth, I think the computers need that meaning. They need to understand what the goal is, and then change its own parameters to get to that goal, and like change different things around. And, and like I said, we're not at that point yet.
No, but I think we will approach that point. We will
Yes.
give them more and more activities that simulate meaning until they can do more and more useful things for us.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. And anyway, the last one, I was amazed to see this. Cancer has gotten much worse. 79% rise in cancer cases among people less than 50 years of age. So that's pretty amazing, and pretty bad thing. And they attribute it to lack of exercise, poor diet, smoking, things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if it has something to do with pollution. But anyway, this is pretty extreme. I had no idea cancer was getting worse. I know the treatments are getting much better, but apparently the incidence is getting a lot higher. And they say it's more than just more being detected. There really is an increased amount of cancer. So this kind of reminds me of a science fiction thing called Millennium years ago, where they said in the future everybody is breathing poison air and drinking poison water and dying basically young of cancer and all that. And to some extent, it appears to be true. One of the sort of post-Holocaust dystopian things. So that's interesting. And now let's hear about Space Force.
Yeah, so Space Force exists now, and it's a real thing. And unfortunately, I think when Space Force was created, they were thinking we're gonna protect, American military satellites and stuff like that. But of course, there's
How are you
been
going to do that? If you want to shoot down a satellite, how could anybody stop you? They're just completely sitting ducks up there, aren't they?
They are. But the United States has been pushing for the commercialization of space for a while now, and we're thinking, oh, this is gonna make things cheaper, and we're capitalists, and things are just gonna be better because of capitalism. But it turns out that when you have things flying in space over international sort of territories, I'm going to call it. If you put something in orbit, it's going to go across the entire world, including, China, North Korea, and other hostile nations.
Right.
And, you do that, and now you have a bunch of satellites put up by commercial people, essentially thinking of these satellites like cell phone towers, and other nations are looking at them as military targets. And so now it looks like the Space Force is going to have to start defending our commercial satellites. So the brave new world of, the private enterprise taking over space does not look like it's going to happen yet. We're going to continue having these sort of joint government, private industry collectives, right? Because the private industry can't defend its satellites from hostile nations, and not by themselves.
How can the military defend its satellites? It just seems like an impossible situation.
To a certain degree, it is, right. This is the article right here. It's on Ars Technica by Stephen Clark, and of course, this all came about because Elon Musk decided not to allow Ukraine to deploy Starlink services at a certain time. And so this basically our attempts to privatize space just became this huge political military mess, right?
Yeah.
And now all the private satellites are on the table for being part of like military ops or interfering with like military or political operations. So how do you defend against satellites in space? Well, certainly, as you point out, it's easy to take down a satellite, and certainly the private industry can't do anything if China decides to take stuff down. Now, the U.S. military does have some political sway, and they can sort of they can use militaristic diplomacy, let's just put it that way, to
they can take revenge on you
for
doing it, but they can't stop you from doing it.
Right, exactly. If North Korea really wanted to take down all the Starlink satellites, well, North Korea is kind of bungling, but if China wanted to,
Yeah.
They could. China or Russia and or China, if they want to take down
But
all.
for that matter, Elon Musk could take revenge on them, like denying them Teslas or something,
Yeah, but that's like I said, this is the problem with trying to move space from like NASA and government controlled agencies to the private sector, is that this inevitably still is a government problem, and we need to find ways to protect it. And it looks like right now the Space Force is going to become the sort of international police, protecting private interests in space.
I guess, it seems to be not that different than we have like oil companies expand to other nations, and then they have U.S. private infrastructure in the other nation, and then nations attack it, and the government has some interest in protecting it.
Exactly. And yeah, so like I said, it's not this pure capitalist maneuver where we're just going to make everything cheaper and we're going to get the government out of the way. The government is still going to play a major role moving forward, even in private operations.
Yeah, it looks to me like Space Force is trying to come up with a mission, and this proposal doesn't make much sense. Even like a lot of their other things don't make sense. He's trying to explain why they should exist and have more budget. And this use case, I think, doesn't survive inspection very much. So we give Space Force a bunch of money. Now, what are they going to do to defend those satellites? I don't see what they're going to do. They're not going to put a shield around them.
I don't.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't know what they could do to prevent a physical attack from happening in the first place.
Yeah, if you want to take revenge, we already have military to do that. I don't see what Space Force, what its purpose is here.
Well, Space Force exists because the Air Force was just stretched thin between, air combat, air defenses, and then all the space stuff they had to deal with. But yeah, like I said, I don't know exactly what. Yeah. I don't think Space Force can prevent an enemy from I don't think they can intercept, a laser beam, frying a spacecraft. But I also don't.
They could maybe stop a cyber attack by helping people put better network defenses on their satellites. Like
they can absolutely do that. They can also just make it clear that there's sort of military repercussions if another nation were to do that. If they were to go after private citizens, space satellites, that there would be, consequences.
Well, what they could be doing is shooting down the other guy's satellites. That seems like that's within their purview.
Yeah, I know. Why wait for China to shoot stuff down? Let's just shoot down their stuff. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. Anyway, then you got a few more stories here.
Yeah. So it turns out, and I'll share this article. According to Vox and AW Olester, Gen Z is more vulnerable to scams online than boomers, which is surprising. But I guess if you're a child, it's really easy to scam kids. Kids are the most gullible people on the planet. I imagine when they become a little older, they'll be just as hard to scam as millennials. But because they're young, they are easy to scam, just like boomers.
What kind of scams do they fall for? Do they tell you?
Let's see. Identity theft, romance scams, and cyberbullying.
That's what I figured. Romance scams are the number one, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Let's see. So we also have a new malware backdoor, which is targeting governments, is according to Tech Radar Pro. And Sid, oh God, I'm going to butcher this last name. Sid Polipasik. I'm sorry about butchering their name. But anyway, it's called Stealth Falcon. Stealth Falcon is the name of the APT. And it's just called Dead Glyph. Dead Glyph is the name of the new malware. There's a technical write-up over here about it, but basically this is a United Arab Emirates malware that's targeting governments. So it just looks like a bunch of really cool malware to look at going forward. I can't wait to get my hands on it. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have this article here about Hans Niemann, who, of course, denies using a vibrating sex toy to cheat at chess. This is according to the BBC News by Thomas
about this for a couple of years. So are there cases where they know people actually did this?
I mean, uh, um, yeah, do you really need proof? I mean, because it sounds real. It sounds
Well,
like
it does sound,
someone
it
would
certainly
do.
is a way you could, in principle, cheat. And I
Yeah.
bet you could think of a million others, have some kind of Wi-Fi enabled device that can receive a signal. I assume you could use it to cheat at tests and everything.
I mean, Neiman, it says here that he admitted that he had cheated before,
Oh,
when he was when he was a teenager.
hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but do you really trust someone who cheated at chess when he was 12 years old to not cheat now that he's an adult and put vibrating sex toys up his butt?
Well, you shouldn't trust him. You should have a countermeasure. And in this case, I would just think all you need is like a radio jammer to jam radio transmissions while you're playing the chess championship, would seem like the answer.
You would think, but I mean, um, I it, I don't know. I mean, this is what they all say. They all say they're not using vibrating sex toys to cheat, but
Well, yeah, of course. I think this is the fundamental problem with having a sport where computers are better at it than humans.
yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yep. Although I guess pretty much everything is going to have computers better at it than humans as we go forward.
Here, someone's here. Ooh.
Okay. Well, that's enough for this. Oh, I thought you had to leave. Oh, good. Someone can join us. Good for her.
Yeah,
She doesn't look impressed.
she is not impressed. What's going on?
She looks pretty happy. I
Oh,
think.
she has she is beginning worshiping me. Like, I took her in, she wanted nothing to do with me. After about a week, she's like, "Oh, you have food, that's cool." She's gone to the point where she now just wants to live in my lap. And
Well, good for her.
yep,
She understands her role in the system.
yes.
All right. Well, that's it for this one. We'll have another one on Friday.